The Virginia and Truckee Railroad was built to serve the Comstock Lode mining communities of northwestern Nevada. At its height, the railroad's route ran from Reno south to Carson City, Nevada. In Carson City, the main line split into two branches. One branch continued south to Minden, while the other branch traveled east to Virginia City. The first section, constructed from Virginia City to Carson City, was constructed commencing in 1869 to haul ore, lumber and supplies for the Comstock Lode. The railroad was abandoned in 1950 after years of declining revenue. Much of the rail infrastructure was pulled up and sold, along with the remaining locomotives and rail cars. In the 1970s, with public interest in historic railroads on the rise, the old lines were rebuilt by private investors, with an eye towards reopening the lines. Today, the privately owned Virginia and Truckee Railroad Company operates as a heritage railroad, headquartered in Virginia City. The present route is 14.1 miles long. The Virginia and Truckee Railroad owns and uses the service mark Queen of the Short Lines. The V&T Railroad runs up to 7 trains per day, many in steam behind locomotive number 29, a 280 consolidation, or an ex-U.S. Army GE 80-ton diesel from Virginia City from Memorial Day until the end of October each year. The Public Nevada Commission for the Reconstruction of the V&T Railway has rebuilt the line from Gold Hill to Carson City, running the first train over the line in 68 years on the 14th of August 2009. The Commission acquired a 1914-282 Mikado steam locomotive, which had been in use by the Sierra Railroad out of Oakdale, California on special lunch and dinner trains. When the No. 18 arrived on the V&T, boiler problems were discovered, and the locomotive awaited repair at the Virginia and Truckee shops in Virginia City. She went to Hollywood for the filming of Water for Elephants. She returned after her scenes were filmed and finally had her first revenue run on July 24, 2010. Cars and locomotives from the original railroad are on display at the Nevada State Railroad Museum in Carson City, at the Comstock History Center on C Street in Virginia City, at the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento, and at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Strasburg. In order to ascend the mountain to Virginia City, it was necessary to build an enormous trestle. Popular Nevada mythology says Crown Point Trestle was considered to be such a feat of engineering that it is featured on the Nevada State Seal. This myth is mentioned by Lucius Beebe, former Nevada State Archivist. Guy Rocha debunks this myth on the State's Myth a Month page, pointing out that the State Seal predates the trestle and shows a viaduct, not a trestle. History. The Comstock Lode gold was discovered in Nevada in the spring of 1850 by a company of Mormon immigrants on the way to the California gold rush. These early travelers only lingered in Nevada until they could cross the Sierras. By 1858, prospectors were soon permanently camping in the area around what is now Virginia City. In 1859, gold was found in outcroppings in the hills and canyons just outside what is now Virginia City. Among the gold ore in these outcroppings were bluish chunks of silver ore which clogged the rockers. Silver was not recognized in this form, so initially it was overlooked in favor of the gold, and later found to be quite valuable. This was the first of the silver from what came to be called the Comstock Lode. Numerous mills appeared along the Carson River from Dayton to Brunswick to process the ore from the Comstock Lode. Low interest rates enticed mine and mill owners alike to finance through the bank. Many of these mills and some mines were built with loans from the Bank of California, whose Nevada agent, William Sharon, would foreclose upon the mines or mills when their owners defaulted on payments. Thus, the bank gradually came into possession of many important mining and ore processing facilities. Sharon, along with business partners Darius Ogden Mills and William Ralston, formed the bank-owned Union Mill and Amp Mining Company to process the ore from the mills that had been foreclosed upon. Initially, the Comstock Lode was a boon for the Virginia City area as the city grew to over 20,000 persons at its height, and was among the largest and wealthiest cities in the West. However, from the beginning, the costs to transport Comstock ore to the mills from points on the lode became so great that many mines were closed and only the higher quality ores were worth processing. Being in control of mines and mills with his partners, Sharon realized that a cheap form of transportation between the mines, the mills, and the cities would allow the bank's holdings to be more profitable. Early years. There were many propositions starting as early as 1861 for railroads to service the area and decrease costs. Sharon eventually envisioned a railroad to run from Virginia City through Gold Hill, where the first of the Comstock Lode was mined, passing the mills along the river, ending at the state capital, Carson City. When finished, this route would cover 21 miles, descend 1,575 feet of elevation, and have so many curves as to make 17 full circles in the 13.5 miles from the river to Virginia City. Ground was broken on February 18, 1869, 2 miles below Gold Hill on American Flats when grading crews went to work. There were 7 tunnels on the line requiring 2 to 5 months each to hole through, and an 85 feet tall, 500 feet long trestle to be built over the Crown Point ravine. The first track and ceremonial first spike was driven on September 28, 1869 by Superintendent H. M. Yerington, with the first passenger train pulling into Virginia City on January 29, 1870. Named the Leon, engine number 1 was one of 3260s purchased from H. J. Booth by the fledgling railroad, along with engine number 2, the Ormsby, and number 3, the Story. The railroad placed orders for 5 locomotives, 3 from H. J. Booth and 2 from Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The first 3 of the 5 original locomotives purchased were named after Nevada counties. The last 2 of the 5 were built by Baldwin and were named Virginia Engine Number 4 and Carson Engine Number 5 after the respective towns. The Baldwin locomotives, Virginia and Carson, were disassembled at Reno on a Central Pacific siding, then hauled up the Geiger grade from Reno to Virginia City, thus reassembled. They had the distinction of being the first locomotives in Virginia City. The Leon, with the distinction of being the first locomotive for the Amp, was also the engine that pulled the work train, finally arriving in Virginia City on January 28, 1870, completing the initially planned route. On November 12, 1869, Amp-T engine number 2 and H. J. Booth 260 pulled the first car of revenue for the company from Carson City to Gold Hill, a flat car loaded with lumber for the Crown Point Company. This milestone was also marked by the opening of the Crown Point Ravine Bridge and the first crossing of the work train. Engine number 1 plus 4 cars followed closely behind by engine number 2 plus 4 cars. It is assumed that from the 12th to the 18th, the railroad laid track to service the local mines of Gold Hill, for without the track, you can't get cars in to load. Without cars, you have nothing to haul, and this was primarily a freight road. However, on November 18, 1869, engine number 1 hauled the railroad's first revenue train of ore from the Yellow Jacket mine. By December 21, regular scheduled trains were running between Gold Hill and Carson City, hauling wooden lumber up the hill and ore back down to the mills. The first lot of ore from the Yellow Jacket mine, and in fact from the Comstock Lode, yet shipped over the railroad, was sent down yesterday to the Yellow Jacket mill on Carson River. There were 7 carloads of it, about 8.5 tons to the load, not far from 60 tons. This was from the 700-foot level of the Old North mine, and dumped directly into the cars, the railroad passing within a few feet of the shaft. It is low-grade ore, saying $26 or $28 to the ton, and will yield under the stamps not far from $17 per ton. It is ore which heretofore was considered too poor to work and was accordingly used to fill up drifts with. The railroad now affords for the first time a chance to work this low-grade ore profitably. Gold Hill Daily News. The first ore shipment, November 19, 1869. In the chapter above from the Gold Hill Daily News, it states that low-grade ore is valued at $26, $28 to the ton. It also states that the result would be around $17 to the ton coming back to the mine. Milling rates were about $7 per ton, based on an average of $27 per ton of low-grade ore that left a freight cost of $3 per ton. That 1 ton of ore could pay the wages for 3 experienced underground miners and a carpenter for a day. So you use your low-grade ore to pay expenses and reap the profits from the high-grade. With the coming of the railroad, a reduction in freight rates for lumber by almost half occurred, and the railroad could haul more material by the trainload, so mining activity would increase, creating more business for the railroad. Sharon's idea of low-cost transportation paid off. The railroad had cost $1,750,000 to build, not including the cost of rolling stock buildings. The Virginia&T ran 30 to 45 trains per day at the height of the Big Bonanza from Carson to Virginia City and Gold Hill. Still primarily a freight railroad, there were 22 locomotives and 361 freight cars in use at the peak of the Virginia and Truckee operations, which carried over 400,000 tons of freight per month. This was in contrast to a mere 10 passenger cars. Expansion and prosperity. In late 1871, a line extension to Reno was begun, to connect the Virginia&T line with the Central Pacific Railroad. This would allow through train service between Virginia City and San Francisco. Construction began with track being installed starting at the Reno end of the line. The first train to run end-to-end from Virginia City to Reno took place on August 24, 1872, pulled appropriately by the road's newest locomotive at the time, No. 11, the Reno. This milestone marked the completion of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. In 1875, the railroad was earning a profit of over $100,000 per month and started paying annual dividends of $360,000 to investors. In 1880, the Virginia&T built a 3-feet narrow-gauge railroad called the Carson-City, Colorado. The railroad never did reach the state of Colorado. Its aim was to head to the southern part of California, and eventually to the Colorado River, where new mining claims were being struck. These never did pan out, and by 1891 those claim sites were all but forgotten. A liability to the Virginia&T, the Slim Princess was sold to the Southern Pacific Railroad in 1900. In the words of Ogden Mills, "Either we built this line 300 miles too short or 300 years too early," reflected Vietnam's attitude towards the railroad. Shortly after the sale of the C&C, however, silver was discovered at Tonopah, Nevada. The C&C became prosperous for the Southern Pacific, as wagon trains would run for miles through the desert to reach the narrow gauge line, which would then carry it back to the Vietnam.At at the Mount House Junction. Because of the break of gauge between the C&C and Vietnam.At, the Tonopah ore had to be unloaded from the narrow gauge cars and into the standard gauge cars at the C&C northern terminus. Southern Pacific officials did not like this arrangement, so in 1904 they converted the entire narrow gauge line to standard gauge, now renamed the Nevada.At California Railroad. In addition, the Southern Pacific offered to buy the Virginia and Truckee, but the Vietnam.At officials set the price too high. Instead, the Southern Pacific built their own line from the closest junction on the former C&C. The line ran 28 miles from Hazen to Fort Churchill and connected their own main lines, thus bypassing the Vietnam.At entirely. In 1904, the corporation changed its name to the Virginia and Truckee Railway. In response to agricultural and cattle ranch concerns, the Vietnam.At built a short branch line to Minden, NV, about 26 miles south of Carson City. In 1906, this branch line brought in increased freight traffic. As a result, the Vietnam.At purchased 3 new 10-wheelers from Baldwin, number 25, 26, and 27 in 1905, 1907, and 1913 respectively. Decline of the railroad. The Virginia and Truckee's decline began as early as 1924, the first year in which the railroad had failed to make a profit. Mining revenue had dropped off to very low levels, though revenue from the Minden line continued to flow. Passenger revenue was on a steady decline, due to the increased use of the automobile on the ever-expanding highway system in the U.S. The sole owner of the railroad in 1933 was Ogden Livingston Mills, grandson of original co-founder Darius Ogden Mills. He personally paid the deficits in the railroad's operating costs as a nod to the past and his family's involvement in the early days of Virginia City. In 1938, a year after Mills' death, the railroad went into receivership, and its management began making plans to cease operations, with the Virginia City branch already having been dismantled during that year. At the time of the railroad's closure, it had only 3 locomotives operating, the second No. 5, as well as numbers chapter 26 and 27. The number 26 was scheduled to haul the last train, but after making its run on May 1, 1950, the single-stall locomotive shed it was stored in had caught fire. The 26, deemed as a total loss, was scrapped, and the road instead restored No. 27 for the occasion. On May 30, 1950, the No. 27 pulled the Virginia and Truckee's final train, rather fitting as experts considered, since the 27 was the last engine purchased new by the road. Lucius Beebe, a noted railroad historian, settled in Virginia City with Charles Clegg, a photographer, and helped to revitalize the town and interest in the railroad by writing books about the Virginia and Truckee as well as other Colorado narrow-gauge railroads, such as the Carson and Colorado Railroad. See below in bibliography. Historic equipment. The Virginia and Truckee's locomotives and other equipment appeared in numerous westerns over the years since the railroad operated otherwise obsolete equipment well into the cinema age. Many of these pieces have been restored, and are currently on display at museums throughout the country. In addition, an operating 5/8 scale replica of the Vint-T locomotive, Reno, has been running on the Washington Park and Zoo Railway since 1959. Other historic designations: National Register of Historic Places #NPS-77001508, Virginia and Truckee Railroad Shops. National Register of Historic Places number 98,001,208, Virginia and Truckee Railroad Depot, Carson City. National Historic Landmark #NPS-05000968, Virginia and Truckee Railway Motor Car 22. Restoring the line. In 1972, Robert C. Gray, who was one of the passengers on the last train to Virginia City in 1938, sought to rebuild the Vint-T as a tourist line. After gaining approval from Story County, reconstruction of the line began from F Street to the eastern portal of Tunnel No. 4. The railroad's first operating season was 1976, utilizing former Dardanelle and Russellville No. 8, 2 opened gondolas, and Vint-T caboose No. 10. The equipment had been leased from Shortline Enterprises, and it was too expensive to renew the rent, so the equipment was returned at the end of the 1976 season. Locomotive No. 28 and caboose No. 10 have since been brought to the Nevada State Railroad Museum, where No. 28 was given back its LD&R number. For the 1977 season, the railroad faced a motive power shortage. The only locomotive available was ex-Pacific Portland Cement Company No. 3, a small Porter 040T locomotive that was very small, lacking in pulling power, and produced so much smoke, an extension had to be added to the smokestack. It was also around this time that the railroad acquired 3 pieces of ex-Western Pacific equipment from a siding in Reno. One of the box cars was converted into an open-air car. The caboose was modified for passenger service, and the second box car was converted into a tunnel car, which proved very instrumental in reopening Tunnel No. 4. During the 1977 season, Bob Gray won an auction at the Longview, Portland and Northern Railway and walked away with 1916 Baldwin 280 number 680. The locomotive was trucked to Virginia City and arrived safely. The locomotive was in good condition, and ran a charter train while still wearing its old identity. A month later, the locomotive was renumbered 29. Work to reopen Tunnel No. 4 continued until it was finally reopened in the late 1980s. Work had started on Tunnel No. 3, but a large boulder shifted and buried the tunnel. A shoehorn was built around the tunnel, just enough as to not be too sharp for the locomotives, opening up a fantastic view of the valley. Conductors narrating the trip often erroneously state the tunnel collapsed in 1938. The correct information has been given. In 1984, the railroad acquired a former Southern Pacific 060 locomotive from a park in Stockton, California. Tracks had to be built through the park to pull the locomotive onto a truck. Since arriving in Virginia City, the locomotive has been given the tentative number of 30, but has been partially dismantled, and no noticeable work is currently occurring due to lack of funds. The 1980s also saw the addition of ex-Feather River Shortline No. 8, a 1907 Baldwin 262. The locomotive arrived in operable condition, and was used alternatively with No. 29. During its career on the Vint-T, its number and lettering were never changed. The line was reopened to Gold Hill in 1991 and marked by a double header pulled by No. 29 and No. 8. Regular service between the two stations began soon after. By 2001, number 29 and number 8 were out of service in need of work, as well as compliance to the Federal Railroad Administration's new boiler regulations outlined in 49 CFR Part 230. After the 2001 season, both locomotives were taken out of service. No other steam locomotives were available, so, for the first time in Vietnam.At history, a diesel engine was used. For the 2002 season, the railroad leased ex-Quincy Railroad No. 3, a GE 44-ton switcher, for the Portola Railroad Museum in Portola, California. In 2003, another GE locomotive painted in Vietnam.At yellow and green and numbered D2 was used. This locomotive's disposition is currently unknown. For the 2004 season, a more permanent diesel was acquired in the form of ex-U.S. Army GE 80-ton switcher #1694. It was repainted in the same paint scheme as the first D2 and given a number D1. The locomotive served as the mainstay of the fleet while number 29 and number 8 were out of service. Engine number 8 never ran on the Vietnam.At ever again due to a legal dispute with the Gold Hill Historical Society, the true owners of the locomotive. As early as 1993, interest in rebuilding the route beyond Gold Hill had been expressed by the state of Nevada. The state set up a commission to rebuild the line, known as the Nevada Commission for the Reconstruction of the Vietnam.At Railway. In 2005, the commission acquired a 1918 Baldwin 282 from the McLeod Railway. The locomotive, number 18, is owned by the commission, but operated by the Grays Operation. Officials with the commission held a Silver Spike ceremony January 3, 2006, in Carson City to commemorate the completion of 2 miles of track near Gold Hill. The construction, completed in September 2005, is part of an effort to restore the Vietnam.At's main line from Virginia City to Carson City for operations. Then Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid, who was instrumental in securing $10 million in federal funding for the project, and Nevada Lieutenant Governor Lorraine Hunt, who secured an additional $1 million in state funding for the project, both spoke at the ceremony. The completion of the first phase of the extensions, or the last train of the day venturing beyond Gold Hill and to American Flats, over a massive fill of the Overman Pit, near the Crown Point Ravine. It is estimated that completion of the line from Gold Hill to Carson City will cost in excess of $55 million, and it is hoped that the line, which was originally abandoned in 1938, was planned to be completed and operational once again in 2012. However, as of 2013, trains only go as far as Eastgate Station. In June 2008, number 29 returned to operation after a significant overhaul. On August 14, 2009, the ceremonial first run from Virginia City to Mand House occurred for VIPs. On the 15th and 16th, the line opened to the public. Funds raised from these runs will be used to pay for the tracks through the Carson River Canyon, and will continue throughout the fall, every Saturday from August 22 through October 31. The runs will use the Vietnam.At Railroad's equipment and not that of the Vietnam.At Railway. Ticket price is set at $48. The railroad is currently building up its collection, acquiring passenger cars from the nation's museums and other private owners. In May 2010, an Alco S4 diesel engine was acquired from Montana in operable condition. It has been numbered D2. On July 24, 2010, the No. 18 steam locomotive was brought online for revenue service. The locomotive had recently come back from Hollywood, appearing in the movie Water for Elephants. In December 2010, an XCB and AMP-Q rail car was trucked into Virginia City. It was to be operational in time for the 2011 season, but is still undergoing restoration work. The V and AMP-T had previously acquired a motorcar in 1976, No. 50 Washoe Zephyr. It is currently at the Nevada.At Railroad Museum in historical paint. D1 was fitted with a rare Hancock 4700 air whistle for the 2011 season, so it would be more pleasant sounding than the loud, booming Nathan Hornet previously. The whistle was rebuilt by the Rizzoli Locomotive Works in Niles, California for the 2014 season. Also in 2011, a permanent water tank was built at the switch to the engine house. In mid-2013, the V and AMP-T acquired the original 1870 passenger depot, which had been a private residence with several cabooses and a V and AMP-T speeder on display. All ticketing and gift shop operations moved from coach No. 25 to the depot. The tracks were also slightly extended to the depot, and a new waiting area with a lawn and benches was built. Short trips now originate and terminate at the depot, rather than next to coach No. 25. Long trips continued stopping on the siding directly next to F Street during the 2014 season, before another siding was added in the depot area in 2015. Originally, operations were to have been moved to the historic freight depot at E and Sutton Streets, which would see Tunnel No. 6 reopen. This plan was eventually abandoned for being too expensive. In May 2013, the railroad acquired a GE 44-ton switcher engine and 3 passenger cars from the defunct Yuma Valley Railway. The diesel has been given the tentative number D3, and began preliminary testing in April 2016. D3 entered passenger service in June 2016 to substitute for D1, which was out of service at the beginning of the 2016 season with an unspecified problem. D3 was equipped with a Hancock 4700 air whistle similar to the one used by D1. The passenger cars are in good condition, with 2 stored scales siding and the third at Gold Hill. The railroad hosted its first day out with Thomas event on October 24, 2015, utilizing the 3 Pullman cars and D2. The observation car Ardell May, several of the privately owned cabooses, and the observation car from the YVRR were used to create a makeshift event center with arts and crafts, and a meet and greet with Sir Topham Hatt.